All right, I think it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, that the Russian invasion of Ukraine is terrible. And of course, no surprise, it sparked vast debate across the world and, of course, across politics, talking about morality, legality, all of that stuff. But I can't think of an organization that's more concerned here than the Concerned Veterans for America. Here's a quote from a statement that they released. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is an immoral act of aggression that has led to a senseless loss of life. While America should continue to support diplomatic efforts to bring an end to this war, it's important to recognize no vital U.S. national interests are at stake in Ukraine that warrant an aggressive military response. Additionally, this is primarily a European security challenge, and as a result, the United States should push our wealthy allies to take the lead in enhancing security in Eastern Europe. Okay, joining me on the program now is John Byrnes, Director of Education for Concerned Veterans for America. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. I want to thank you for having me on. And last time we talked, you were on a different platform. So congratulations on the new gig here.
Well, I'm still there on Sirius XM Patriot. I'm just pulling double duty now.
Awesome.
All right, you guys, when I say are the most concerned, I mean among veterans organizations, political organizations, because you guys have already fought our wars, and now you stand up for veterans in the realm of politics.
Among other things, yeah. I mean, we Concerned Veterans for America exists to preserve the freedoms and the benefits that veterans fought for and that their families also sacrificed for at home and abroad. And one of those freedoms is we prefer a freedom from war, a freedom from entangling wars overseas. We've seen enough of that over the last 2 decades.
See, now this is where a lot of the divide is. The people that used to call themselves the anti-war left are now beating the drum and saying anyone who's not for action against Putin is with Putin. That's kind of ridiculous.
It's absolutely insane. And as you read from our statement, this is a horrible thing. I don't want to understate the idea that war on the continent of Europe, war in Europe between two European nations is unprecedented in this century and unprecedented in the lifetime of the vast majority of us, right? There's not a whole lot of us who are alive 70, 80 years ago, the last time this happened. It's unprecedented. But at the same time, this is not a conflict that the U.S. should be involved in militarily. I mean, we're talking about, Russia, which is still the largest nuclear arsenal on the planet, and a war between the United States and Russia is definitely not in the interests of the United States.
I have to ask this question because, look, I know there are some people that want to frame Ukraine as, look, they are innocent here. They are a peaceful nation. They did not do anything to provoke Russia to simply invade. But to think that the Ukrainian people are a monolith, that would be to not understand Ukraine. When we went into Iraq, and I say we, I mean the United States, yes, there were people that greeted the United States as liberators, but then quickly an insurgency formed. Ukraine has a measurable percentage of its population that are ethnic Russians. They speak Russian. They are cultural Russians. They see themselves as Russians, but living in Ukraine. It stands to reason if America put boots on the ground in Ukraine, although a portion of the Ukraine people would greet them as liberators, you still might have a pro-Russian insurgency.
You highlight one good point. That there's other problems too. I mean, among the reasons that the Ukraine was not admitted to NATO were corruption. The democracy is far from perfect. There are several regions that have been in separatist revolt for close to a decade now. In one way or another. Certainly for the last 6 or 7 years. Again, on the side of Ukraine that is Russian facing and often Russian speaking, it's a very, very complicated country. It's not like, like people have talked about admitting Ukraine to NATO. It wouldn't be like admitting France or Germany, right? This is a country that still has a lot of problems. And again, the deepest sympathy for the Ukrainian people. They don't deserve what's happening to them right now. But this is something that the Eastern Europeans and the Europeans altogether need to figure out the security solution to.
Look, when I saw videos of dads saying goodbye to their kids because they're being handed AK-47s, the government made Molotov cocktails legal. I can't imagine what that would feel like to be an untrained civilian and be told by your government, you might just be handed a weapon in the street, or go ahead and learn how to make Molotov cocktails. I mean, I can't possibly imagine what that would be like. Even with that said, if NATO was going to do anything, it seems like the time for that has passed. They would have had to have overwhelmed the situation and made sure that Russia didn't even cross the border. Now it seems like NATO and the Biden administration are playing catch up.
It does seem like that. That's absolutely true. You know, not we conservatives from America, or even we America, but we, the West, America, NATO, have sent a lot of mixed signals to Russia and the Ukraine about how much we care about Ukraine. At the end of the day, America and probably most of Western Europe is never going to care as much about the Ukraine as Russia does. It's in their near abroad. They consider it as part of their sphere of influence. They consider it as part of the buffer zone that keeps, historical Western armies from invading them. And however rational that may or may not seem to us here in the 21st century, it is a major consideration in that nation's history.
Let's talk about Germany real quick. Are they still one of our allies? I mean, they have continued to buy Russian oil and natural gas, and some of our other NATO allies have well. But Germany is one of the larger consumers in the EU. They seem to be saying, well, you can't exactly throw Putin and Russia out of SWIFT. And, I don't know, maybe Russia's not so bad after all. We don't want to send lethal aid to Ukraine. They didn't. One of the NATO holdouts. It seems like Russia has a lot of leverage over Germany. How can NATO stand united if one of the largest armies in NATO, one of the largest militaries in the EU says, we're taking a pass here?
I understand why the Germans wanted to take a pass. It would have been helpful if they helped us engage in more constructive diplomacy in the months-long run up to this war. But you raise a great point in that if Germany, who is, the closest traditional old school NATO member to Ukraine and Russia, if they don't care enough about this, it's certainly not in the United States' interest to risk American lives or American material or taxpayer dollars to defend the Ukraine.
Look, I'm sure there are a few veterans that ever thought to themselves in the midst of combat, thank God for the UN, but the United Nations did nothing. Wasn't the United Nations created to promote peace and stability? Isn't that why there's this thing called the UN Security Council? And isn't it a little bizarre that the nation that chairs the UN Security Council also happens to be the nation that led the invasion of their neighbor?
Well, the United Nations, as you know, was formed in the aftermath of World War II. And the idea was that the Security Council would be the five great powers of the world as they existed then, and that they would kind of settle things between the two of them, and that would help prevent war. We've seen repeatedly that there's differences in opinion about interest between many of those great powers. And, we've seen multiple members of the United Nations Security Council permanent members who have engaged in wars of choice. And this is the latest one. This is Putin's war of choice. It's on him. There are a lot of things that America could have done better in the last 20 years, in the last 30 years since the fall of the Iron Curtain. But for all those mistakes, the worst mistake we could make now is to get involved in military confrontation with the world's largest nuclear arsenal.
That, and I will say this as we head to our close here, after the withdrawal from Afghanistan, I don't know, look, and I know troops will follow the orders of the commander-in-chief. That's what they do. That's what you've done. Does anyone really want to go into a war with a commander-in-chief who really created the disaster that was the Afghanistan withdrawal? I mean, I'm sorry. I think maybe some time is needed for the commander-in-chief and the military to figure a few things out before they get the United States into a long-term war. And I don't know, maybe some people would disagree with that. I look at the Afghan withdrawal and I say to myself, the world saw weakness. They saw failure, and now they're seeing failure again. I do have to leave it there. John Byrnes, you are welcome on the program. We'll get you back soon. Thanks for joining us.